So this module is all about the GDPR. I'll warn you, this is quite a long module and it's not the most interesting. So I would recommend you listening to me go through it rather than reading all the text. So let's begin then. Oh, that's not working. Let's go. So GDPR. This is a compulsory module about the general data protection. The general data protection regulation, sorry. This module should give you a general understanding of the GDPR and some principles. You should also be able to explain each principle by the end of this module. The learning outcomes are understand what the GDPR is, understand what personal data is, and understand what data is not covered by the GDPR. Be able to recognize and understand each principle of the GDPR. So let's start. What is the GDPR? The GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, is the main law which concerns data collection processing for organizations within the UK or organizations outside the UK which offer goods or services inside the UK. So I'm sure you'll understand if any organization operating within the UK, so say for Morrison's, they're selling goods or services, they must follow the UK GDPR. But if organization outside the UK, a good example would be Google. They're offering goods and services inside the UK, as you can access Google from your home in the UK. They must also follow the UK GDPR. The GDPR is extremely important as organizations must follow the principles of GDPR if they collect and process data legally. So if you as an individual know about the GDPR, they will know how organizations must legally and process the data. This will further inform the individuals on their rights. Essentially, if you know the law, you'll be able to protect yourselves. That's the main thing to know. As a data collection is very hard to identify otherwise. So what is personal data? The GDPR is all to do with personal data. This is any data that can identify an individual is personal data. So name and address are the good example of personal data. Or any data when processed can identify an individual. For example, the organization someone's IP address, phone number, and location. These alone cannot identify an individual, but if an organization combines these forms of data, they can identify an individual. As such, this processing is to do with personal data and falls under the guidelines of GDPR. So what is not covered by GDPR? So the data not covered by the GDPR is any data when collected and processed that cannot identify an individual is not covered by GDPR. i.e. information is truly not anonymous. So if an organization is collecting how many people visited the site but not collecting any data on them, that's truly anonymous. They don't know who's visiting this site, but collecting how many people visited the site. So interesting enough, data about a disease person is not personal data, so it does not fall under the GDPR. Though there are other remedies for this, but just so you know that data about your loved ones is not considered personal data and may be accessible to companies or public authorities. Again, data on companies or public authorities are not considered personal data. So there are 7 core principles of GDPR. The first 5 are more relevant for us as an individual to know our rights and how to protect them. The last 2 are more for the organization. I will still briefly mention them, but they're not as relevant. So let's go through them. Lawfulness, fairness, and transparency, purpose limitation, data minimization, accuracy, storage limitation, integrity and confidentiality, and accountability. So these principles lie at the core of the data protection. These principles are not strict recommended rules which companies can find a workaround, but rather companies must follow the spirit of the rules. This essentially means companies must adhere to the aims and purposes of the law. So for example, a good example of this would be, it's rather morbid, but I'll say it anyway. So if your mom tells you, if your mom says you can't eat any junk food. So if your mom tells you can't eat any, so for example, if your mom tells you you must go to practice. Say you're in a club and you must go to practice and play football. You must go to practice, football club practice. But you go to the practice, but you just don't play football. That was clearly not the aim. When your mom said go to school, or when your mom said, for example, if your mom says you must go to school. For example, you go to school and then you come back straight after, so you don't spend more than say 10 minutes in the school. It was clearly against the intentions of what your mother's orders. The GDPR is not toothless. in a sense, because breaking any of these principles could lead to a fine of 4% of annual worldwide turnover. Again, for big organizations like Google, that's probably why that's there, or 17.5 million pounds. Interestingly enough, there's a website called What Company, which will show you what companies have been fined by the GDPR. It's been more based on the EU, but it also shows some English companies who have been British companies that have been fined by the GDPR. And if you go on that website, you'll know that many companies have been fined by GDPR, but very few of them have had very high fines. So it is what it is, not ideal. So the first principle is essentially three: lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. So I'll discuss this in subsequent slides. So lawfulness. So if an organization is processing data, they must specify the specific lawful basis for processing personal data. There are 6 lawful bases. They can use any one of these, but they must have one of these for processing personal data. If they do not have any of these, they will be liable to fines. They must specify that. Also, organizations, there'll be more on this on a whole module in itself, but the 6 lawful bases, because they're very important. Also, organization cannot do anything that's unlawful with the personal data, i.e. violate human rights or violate corporate information, more likely use your information to commit fraud is quite a common one. Personal data should never be utilized in a way that, personal data should never be utilized in a way that might have unjustified and negative impact on individuals, and only in a way that people would fairly anticipate. This essentially means that when organizations collect or use your personal data, they should only use it in a way that you would anticipate them to use it. So, for example, if you go to the A&E and you had a heart attack, they should not share that data with your employer, for example, or they should not share that example with any organization that may want to hire you but may be feared because you have got a health risk. They should not share that because that will have a negative impact on your future career prospects. So it's important to gather personal information in a clear and open manner. So any data, it is doubtful any data obtained by deceiving or misleading people adhere to the fairness principle. So essentially, when they're collecting data, it must be in a clear and open manner. So you should be able to understand what personal data they're collecting and why they're collecting it. There should be no surprises for you. If they're deceiving or misleading you, you have a very strong case. So make sure to take that to court. Though there are limitations to that as well. Transparency. Finally, transparency. The last of the first principle. When processing personal data, organizations must be clear right from the start who they are, how they are, and why they're using personal data. Organizations must also tell individuals about the way data is being processed in a straightforward manner, which is in simple and clear English, so a layperson can understand. And what is being a layperson can understand what is being processed without needing further education, as well as make that information easily accessible. Transparency. So this essentially means that organizations are clear right from the start how they're processing data, what data they're collecting, and you should be able to understand why they're processing that data in a way that you can understand. Because, like when you read a user agreement, there's a lot of the time you just press accept, and that might be because there's a lot of text and you can't understand it. So it's very important that organization make it so you can understand what they say. Okay, transparency is important when the individual has a choice into relationship or when individuals have no direct. Transparency is important when individuals have a choice into relationship with an individual or when they have no direct relationship with an individual. For example, if I'm filling in a questionnaire, I have a choice to enter a relationship with an individual. Or when you have no direct relationship with an individual, this could be when somebody's processing Twitter data, like there are a few APIs which will do that. A few programs which do that, where they'll process Twitter data and find out and conduct sentiment analysis on that. So remember, transparency is important then as well. Purpose notation. So purpose notation is the second of the 7 principles of GDPR. Essentially, this means organizations must be clear from the start what personal data they are collecting, why they're collecting data, what do they intend to do with the data. You should be able to find answers to these questions all in the privacy information of any website. that is collecting personal data in the UK. Essentially, well, this is quite interesting. It's not necessarily that it has to be in the privacy information privacy part of any website, but generally that's where they will keep it. Otherwise, they have to make it another clear part where you'll find it. But for this purposes, most organizations will put in the privacy information for website, and if they contact you directly, they'll have to tell you straight right from the start what the intent, what the purpose of the data collection is. All right. Now let's take a break and have a go at the anagram. Just end the presentation here. And thank you for listening.